Nuclear Option, which I believe is set in the not too distant future in a fictional world, arguably has no weapons at all which are unguided. Even the most basic PAB 125 and PAB 250 bombs are optically guided. The only weaponry that is, I suppose, unguided are guns and cannons on the aircraft, but even these, when locked onto a target, will give you a prompt as to where to shoot, and many other weapons when to shoot. In some cases, it's simply a case of pointing your aircraft in the general direction of your target and pulling the trigger when in range. And all of this got me to thinking, technology is a fine thing, but what if technology goes wrong? What if an aircraft's targeting computer fails? It's damaged due to enemy action, or just due to conditions perhaps? Or maybe it's the guidance on the weapon itself that fails? What is a pilot in the Nuclear Option universe to do then? Some of you watching this may know that I was once a member of the UK's Armed Forces, and one of the things that the British military prides itself on is training its people to operate at the minimum level of technology. And when they become proficient at that level, they then start to introduce technological marvels to them. A soldier will become proficient at navigation using map and compass before being introduced to a global positioning system, for example. And the same goes for the pilots. So when all this fancy technology fails, as it inevitably sometimes does, the person using it isn't fucked. And so I decided to challenge myself. Play a game of confrontation using bore sight only, no locking onto any targets. Just bore sight reticule and the dive bomb aiming pipper, and that is all. With the only exception being if I was to use any S2 air-to-air missiles, purely because without locking onto your target, those missiles become just ballast, they are beyond useless. It's worth mentioning that I used a modded game of confrontation called Confrontation 1950 by Belligerent Herald. It's basically meant to be set similarly to the early Korean War, so lots of propeller-driven aircraft, in this case crickets. Compasses are far more expensive and need to be looked after, and there are no fancy weapons. There are no real long-range guided weapons like AGM-48s, anything like that. Linchpins, kingpins, and PAB 125s, PAB 250s are available, but as already said, I'm going to be using the bore sight to fire those weapons. I am not going to lock onto my targets. And for this first sortie, I was taking 20mm gun pods and a whole host of linchpins. And with battle already joined, I lined up on a column of tanks advancing towards my own friendly ground forces. An ideal attacking position would be to fire along the length of the column, but unfortunately I didn't have that benefit at the moment. And being the true professional pilot that I am, I had actually forgotten to select the weapon I wanted, in this case linchpins, and was driven off by the enemy ground fire, having fired only a very short, very ineffectual burst of 50 caliber machine gun. But this little mishap brought me onto a new target, an enemy cricket attempting to attack my own ground forces. Quickly countering an enemy heat-seeking missile fired I believe by a chicane, I concentrated on my target and prepared to do some deflection shooting. That is aiming at where the aircraft will be at the moment my rounds approach the target. This would be where the targeting pipper would tell you to shoot if I was to lock onto the target, of course. After a quick couple of bursts, my target began to take evasive action, and we entered into scissors, as my own friendlies on the ground opened up on him, almost hitting me in the process. But as he pulled out of a shallow dive, I whacked him with my 20mm cannons, destroying his plane and hearing one of the crew ejecting. I believe I killed the pilot in the pass. And so turning back towards the main battlefield, I caught sight of an enemy chicane running amok among our forces. Chicanes are absolutely deadly in any capacity, air to ground and air to air, and especially at close range, they can shred almost anything with their cannons. Once again, casually flaring off an enemy IR missile, I turned towards my target and prepared my attack. When attacking chicanes, I often find myself becoming somewhat fixated on them. The moment I see cannon flashes, I turn away, but this enemy chicane was well and truly locked in on my own ground forces, and I came in from the starboard quarter, fired a quick burst, absolutely shredding the aircraft, and again killing one of the crew apparently, having seen only one man eject. With the enemy chicane down, I turned towards some enemy ground vehicles. It was time to have an unguided rocket run using linchpins. Sighting the leading vehicle, I settled the crosshair just over the target and pulled the trigger. However, despite firing 2 bursts of rockets, I was unsuccessful in destroying the vehicle. But his comrades, pulling up the rear, might well do. One was about to slow down to take a turn, and I was able to fire off some rockets and score a hit, despite getting engaged at roughly the same time. I came back around, hoping to have another go at the leading vehicle, but I was fully aware that I was at a very shallow angle, and this could be very dangerous for attacking ground vehicles. But I was already committed. Aiming just ahead of the vehicle, I pulled my trigger. But some friendly ordnance hit the vehicle and destroyed it just before my own rockets hit the target, and I received a face full of fragmentation for my troubles. And of course, having taken damage and fired off my linchpins, I was in mind to return back to base. But a number of enemy aircraft, including some crickets, were engaging our ground forces, and so I decided to use what was left of my 20mm ammunition on one of these aircraft. Rather than get up close like I had done before, this time I decided to take some long distance shots to test my abilities, and to be fair, it was quite good practice. I scored several hits on my first burst, the enemy changed direction, trying to manoeuvre away, and a couple more short bursts set his aircraft ablaze, forcing the crew to eject. And so, having successfully scored 3 air-to-air kills, and having used up all my air-to-ground weaponry, I returned to base to rearm, repair, and go again. And so, with a repaired plane, refueled and rearmed, I prepared to take off again. Once again I had my 20mm cannon pods, but this time I also carried 125kg bombs. I openly admit that I had been taken aback at my rather shocking shooting with the linchpins in an unguided capacity. Sure, I destroyed one vehicle and may have destroyed another if my friends hadn't done so first, but 28 rockets and only 1 confirmed kill is not a very good ratio in my opinion, and so I decided to go for bombs. But even as I prepared to carry out a bombing run on the enemy base at the Dust Bowl Highway airstrip, I was engaged by a fellow cricket, and the 2 of us got into a rather tight turning fight. At one point I thought he had me, but with some rather violent jinking left and right, I managed to get an advantage. Squeezed my trigger and got some hits, and once again trying my best at some deflection shooting, I aimed just ahead of my target, squeezed the trigger once again, and this time was rewarded with a kill, as his wing broke off and the crew ejected. And then not a few minutes later, as I attempted to use the terrain to get in close to the enemy base to carry out my attack, I noticed another enemy cricket targeting me, preparing to engage. I could not ignore it, and so I began some violent turns towards and away from the enemy aircraft, causing it to overshoot. Coming around, I once again got the advantage, getting up behind my enemy, and following a quick squirt of 20mm cannon fire, the enemy aircraft burst into flames and broke up in the sky. Knocking enemies out of the sky with 20mm cannons was proving easy enough, I suppose, but my plan to run in on the enemy base and drop my 6 PAB 125 bombs was not as easy as it seemed. Strong self-propelled enemy anti-aircraft guns were really causing me some problems, and that, combined with the enemy aircraft shooting their air-to-air missiles at me, made breaking through to my target alone very difficult indeed. If I was to try this in a coordinated effort, it might prove far more better. But playing alone and my AI allies concentrating on a different part of the map, I did not have that luxury, and so I decided more speed might help, and took off in a compass, carrying 14 PAB 125 bombs. Once again, the enemy air defense guns, as well as air-to-air missiles launched from aircraft, threw me off my mark. But approaching from a different attack direction, I was able to get my bombs off on my targets. Now, watching this back, I feel I must admit that this was kind of cheating against the rules which I'd set for myself, for the bomb aiming pipper could be seen right through my dashboard instruments, and so I am quite happy that none of my bombs actually killed anything. But I was now being chased by an enemy fighter and had suffered some damage. Part of my tail was missing and my starboard engine was exposed. Enemy air defense guns were still blasting away at me as I tried to make my escape from the enemy airfield. And once again, it was only through pulling some rather violent manoeuvres, despite my damaged aircraft, that I was able to get the enemy aircraft off my tail, and in fact, turn the tables on him. Coming up round behind him, he was now in my sights. I blanked out the near misses from the enemy air defence out of my mind, and concentrated on bringing down this target in front of me to make my sortie at least part worth it. My first couple of bursts I scored 1 or 2 hits, but it wasn't enough to destroy the aircraft. Until at last, closing the distance, I made a sharp turn and I was able to line him up and bring him down. And whilst of course returning back to base to get a new working aircraft and rearm, I came across an enemy chicane, who was too juicy a target for me to ignore. A long, solid burst from my cannons destroyed it entirely, before touching down back at the base. On my next sortie, I was carrying a mixture of PAB 125 and PAB 250 bombs, and decided that this time I would go in on the enemy base, when allied aircraft were also in the vicinity, therefore sharing the pain should the enemy engage me. Whilst on the way, and whilst waiting for my own friendlies to catch up with me, I engaged an enemy compass quite intent on his air-to-ground sortie. And this chap, through no real fault of his own, was proven to be quite a prickly customer. It was so difficult to get shots on target for him. He was making very slight adjustments to his heading, not doing sharp turns, just slight turns to left or right, up and down, whilst also engaging my friendlies on the ground. He destroyed several vehicles whilst I chased him, firing off bursts that could continue to miss, until at last I scored several hits, but fearing I was about to overshoot my target, I quickly turned away to stop him getting guns on me. It seems my burst, which only appeared to cause some light damage, actually destroyed the target in the end. But I was impressed. The force was strong with this one. I had earlier tried some high-level bombing on this base, and it had come to nothing thanks to the anvil stationed there. So now I was going to attempt fast and low. And so as I turned back towards my primary objective, the Highway Dust Bowl airstrip, I realised that several of my allies had actually been engaging enemy ground forces in and around the airbase, even knocking out some of the anti-aircraft weaponry there. This was of course now the best chance to get in, release my ordnance and destroy as much of the base as I could, and running along the base's length, almost along the entire runway in fact. I released my bombs as I went, and turned away before I could be shot down by what remained of the enemy ground forces. Though not all of my bombs hit the target, I had done enough damage to effectively knock the base out of the fight, leaving the enemy with only Sandrift Air Base left with which to engage our forces. Some of our follow-on forces would have to come and mop up the Dust Bowl Highway airstrip, but for now, this base was done. And once again, on the way back to base, I engaged and shot down yet another enemy chicane, and another enemy cricket. It did not take me long, however, to realise that attacking Sandrift Airbase and knocking out the factories there was not going to be easy, and it took several sorties to slowly chip away at the enemy air defences there. Once again, unfortunately playing on my own, our attacks were somewhat uncoordinated, leading to a high attrition rate among our side, and it took me several bombing runs using PAB 250s to destroy some of the factories and many of the ground targets. And not all of these bombing runs will I survive.
Engine fire.
As already mentioned, I imagine this would be so much more easier if I was able to coordinate my attacks with my friendly forces. And though indeed this was in fact possible in theory, it simply meant having to wait for my AI friendly forces to attack the enemy target area. It didn't help that despite us attacking the main enemy base, enemy aircraft continued to launch harassing raids against our own airbase at the K92 highway. At last, I found myself approaching the target area, carrying a rack of PAB 250 bombs at around about the same time that a handful of friendly aircraft were also attacking the main enemy base, a mixture of chicanes and compasses. With a number of the main priority targets, the factories, having already been destroyed by either myself or AI aircraft on solo runs, not much was left for us to destroy in order to get the victory we so dearly deserve by this point. And so, observing the positions of my friendlies in the skies above the base, I prepared my attack, being careful to come in from a different point of the compass from where my friendlies were, with a chicane engaging enemy forces at the main gate of the base, and another compass operating further to the south. I was able to take my chance and run in on the enemy factory, dropping my PAB 250 bombs, and finally destroying the final priority target. Victory was ours, despite continued enemy resistance as anti-aircraft vehicles tried to destroy me, but we had won, and I was very happy. It may not seem it from this video, but it had been a rather long and quite tiresome experience, to be quite honest with you, but a very rewarding one all the same. Thank you ever so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please let me know in the comments, and also try and give me some more challenges to do, similar kind of things. Just bear in mind, I fly almost exclusively for BDF. I don't do Pala, but I will for the sake of a challenge. So please leave any challenge ideas you have in the comment section, and I will try to get to them at some point. Thank you once again for watching. Cheerio.